Arizona. So she is going to present on to us her works and her method behind her madness. And apparently I did not make it clear her cat was a requirement. So yeah. So Carly, over to you.
Great. No, thank you. Good introduction. I'm jealous. I never got to go to Mission Clay. I was going to do that when the pandemic hit, which is a real bummer. So, and the one other thing is that you guys should hook up with ASU in some way. Like I would have loved when I was teaching there to have you guys come give a talk to the undergrads and to the grads. Because as a professor, you know, you worry so much about what's going to happen to your students once they graduate. It would be fabulous if they had an organization to come into. So that's something we could talk about later. You know, I could,
yeah, that'd be great
with the Clay Club there, with Susan or Sam.
Great,
it would have been nice to have a place to send them. All right, so I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint. I'm gonna do a talk about my work, and then we'll do like a 5-minute bathroom scene change break. And I'll move over to my studio. Just the acoustics in there are terrible. And I don't have a door, I have a curtain, so this just works better. All right, so share screen, PowerPoint. Okay, Don't read my notes. No. Oh man, we should have. Anybody know how I can still see my, presenter view? Perfect. So can you guys see my notes or no?
We can see your notes, but we'll pretend we can. How about that?
Oh man, we went over this to not have to do this. Does anybody know how to undo that? I'm so sorry.
Gabrielle, can you jump into this?
Yeah, I don't know with the in the taskbar with that. Okay, set up slideshow, hide slide. From beginning. What happens when you hit from beginning, the one right there? Does that just, there we go. That now
Yeah,
we can,
now
we
yeah.
the whole thing. Yeah.
We don't see your notes now.
But I can't either.
Oh, okay.
Oh dear.
I need those. Oh darn.
What's under display settings?
Something just happened.
Was there a present online? What does that present online do? Oh no.
No, it's a
Thought
service.
maybe that would.
Gonna do something crazy.
Yeah, I don't want to do something crazy.
Oh, see your over there to the right is a monitor setting. Oops. So
Guys, I mean, we did a run through and it didn't occur to me that PowerPoint would be something we'd be having a problem with.
yes.
Back. All right, let's try this again.
Could you share?
You can choose what window specifically what window that you want to share. So if you can pull it up in just its own window, you don't have to share screen. You can just share a window.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know if you could open and keep another version of it open. I'm not sure if that would work or not.
Like have doubles. I guess that could work. That just sounds super confusing.
While you're working on that, I forgot part of what I'm touting about Brian's presentation is Brian comes to us with this beautiful Southern accent. So that is a bonus on top of, you know, the material he's presenting on.
No, that was just a bad
I would just say no pressure, but now Carly, we need you to whip out your Canadian accent.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it sneaks out. I mean, we don't really sound that much different than you guys do, to be honest. All right, we might try Brian's suggestion and see if I can open up 2 of these puppies. doubt that I can. Oh man. Were other people able to do a slideshow and keep their notes?
I don't know if they used notes.
Yeah.
I think they may have just shown the slides and
Off the cuff?
they were.
Wing it, Carly. You can do this.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not, okay, I'll wing it, but it's not going to be as well. No, oh man. Oh man. All right. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to take the little boxes on the right hand of your screen and you're going to cover up my notes with it. Okay.
All right. We'll just cover them up with a piece of paper and
There you go. Little pictures of yourself over there. All right.
on your honor system.
I have jokes written down. Don't read them before I get to them. That would be super awkward. All right. So this is supposed to say my name, but generally just, hi, my name's Carly Slade. Thanks you so much for coming out. What is happening? Sure. All right. So start a little bit about myself. So I'm from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So that's kind of like above Montana is kind of what most Americans, what I tell them. Edmonton, Alberta, the city I grew up in, the city of just under 1 million people. It's a pretty decent sized city. Alberta, you guys would probably know it for being like the oil producer of Canada. That's where like the tar sands are, Fort McMurray. That's kind of what most people know about Alberta. Edmonton is a very blue collar town, very working class. My dad was an electrician. All of my friends' dads worked somewhere in the oil field. It was just kind of very normal that we were all just kind of like working middle class families. Growing up, some years were good, some years were bad, but it was definitely a time of hope, a time of strong unions, a time when if you just worked hard enough, you could achieve the American dream or Canadian dream, same thing, you know, house, car, 2 kids, white picket fence and all of that. Oh, there's me and my dad. So I grew up in a fairly traditional household. My parents were from a generation in which my electrician, kind of trades working dad expected my mom to have dinner on the table when he came home. Very kind of like rigid gender roles. As a kid, I'd always want to go like, look at this, total daddy's girl, wanted to see what he was doing. And as a kid, I'd want to go hang out in the garage with my dad. And my dad would always tell me to go back inside and essentially learn how to cook from my mother. And you know, it was at this very young age that I became aware of my gender and the limitations that it imposed upon me. Oops, sorry. Oh, this is going terribly. There we go. You know, this kind of worked out well for me because I think my mom, I'd probably call my first art teacher. She'd always bring home embroidery kits and beading kits and all these like different crafts. To this day, she's a pretty prolific cross stitcher. That's what I got her for Christmas. So it was interesting to get to learn all of these more kind of like traditionally feminine art skills from her. Like this. And it was all like kind of going back to Alberta being this land of oil. As a kid, I became really aware of the forces outside of my home that were beyond our control. In the early 90s, I remember that oil prices tanked and my father had to leave town for weeks at a time to find work. I remember he'd always have to go up to Fort Mac and he'd be gone for like a month and then back for a week. I remember growing up Christmases, one Christmas, my teddy bear and my blankie both gave me Christmas gifts because it was so loaded under the tree. And then I also remember years that under the tree were pretty sparse. So just the beginning of this kind of uneasy feeling of unfairness or precariousness or almost, you know, it doesn't matter how hard you work. Like there are these external forces that can just kind of crash these things down upon you. We'll talk about this house more later on. This was in my show in Kansas. All of my buildings are of real buildings. So this building is actually, this house is from Edmonton, Alberta. I found it on Google Maps. It's from a neighborhood called Mill Woods, and growing up, Mill Woods was the suburb on the outside of the town, and that's kind of where you lived if you were kind of like making it. So it's just kind of always existed as this space in my mind of what success meant at that time. Boom, but being a bit of a sassy lady, I was like, I'm gonna go into construction and I'm gonna do whatever I wanna do. So my last year of high school, I started working in the trades. I worked for 4 summers for a company called D-Line. We did natural gas services, residential services for homes. This is me, I think, being Thor. That's what I've written down there. Possibly being Thor. And then on the left here, standing a concrete sink. I co-owned a precast concrete shop for 4 or 5 years, making concrete sinks, wall panels, fireplaces, all sorts of furniture, all sorts of really amazing things. I always really love the camaraderie of working construction and being with the crew and this kind of like get her done attitude. And I miss that a lot. That's kind of where I started collecting all sorts of little pieces of like fence or wire or bolts or things I thought looked cool. And I'd come home every day with my like pockets just full of all these like little bits that later on would start to kind of make it into my work. But I think that's definitely where I started looking at all different types of objects as kind of like material and looking at them for their intrinsic beauty. Kind of like a bird, like filling up her little nest every night. You know, but again, this is kind of hearkening back to like, regardless of what my position was, how hard I worked, whose boss I was, whose I wasn't, you know, again, being this woman in a man's world and always kind of being reminded of that, that always kind of got to me and would always kind of surface. Oops, gosh. Here we go. So if you guys have looked at my work at all, I make buildings, I make trucks, I make trains. And I think a question that I often get is, why are you making buildings and why out of clay? That's a really big question, but some of my kind of thoughts about that would be that I think that buildings and the spaces that they occupy as vessels, if you think of the same way, like a Greek urn or you know, a coffee cup, something like that. I think within these buildings, they hold the residue of the people that have passed through them, while their outsides are the reflection of their time and place. Each brick was placed by someone's hand, the foundation poured by a crew, porch lights glow from the effort of an electrician. Like a Greek amphora speaks to a social gathering and tells a story of their culture in pictures scratched into its surface. So this is that same building, and this one is in Helena, Montana. It was closed down, and I used to drive past it every day to get to the studio when I was at the Bray. So once a structure is built, it becomes like a book with blank pages, ready to be marked and altered to hold its history. The front banister was bent when the second owner backed his car into it. The ornate molding around the front door is original to the home, covered with 8 layers of paint, and now out of place in its rundown neighborhood. But it hints back to a time when the houses were new, the jobs reunion, and the hope was palpable. I observed that there is an impermanence to the lives spent in the buildings we inhabit and work in, and I'm frightened by the precarious nature of the working class. My work investigates the gendering of ownership and space. Of labor and space. I think a lot about people, a lot about the spaces they inhabit, people in each other's spaces, spaces after people have left, about who makes the space, people who lost their space, about what they left behind there, or maybe took with them. I'm interested in space as both an archive and a facade. You know, hearkening back to me filling my pockets with all these little bits of materials from the sites. I'm definitely interested in materiality. I use a lot of found embroidery from thrift stores. I think a lot about who made that embroidery, 99% chance it was a woman. Why is this certain type of labor not kind of exalted and held up the way that other labor is? So I think it's like an honor to be able to take their kind of like patches of embroidery, each one of those is probably 4 or 5 hours of labor, and be able to kind of repurpose it and put it in a gallery where I think it should always belong. This section here, it's from a larger show called Blue Language. It's a triptych. So this is one of the 3 parts. This building is actually where my concrete shop was. We started in the garage and then we got a shop. So it'd be the far left bay. I think we were in there for 2 or 3 years. But this piece, I think, really kind of talks about my love for materials. The back is upholstered with denim. Little wood buttons, that orange thing, that's a bumper that I found on the side of the road in San Jose and dragged back to the studio. That's been riveted. The building is sitting on top of carpet under padding. Yep. And then it's got the little, the lines to divide the parking, that's all stitched in. We've got porcelain, slip cast, power poles. So really kind of thinking about material for its, I say baggage, which I don't mean in a negative way, but if we're talking about denim, that denotes probably working class, denim jackets, that type of thing. A messed up car bumper, a Mustang, what does that mean versus the car bumper off of a Benz? Thinking about all these different things and kind of mixing them together to further explain my story.
And do you, Carly, this is Melissa, sorry, sorry.
Oh, that's good. I was like, am I just talking into a void? Is anybody here?
Do you like your displays, like the one we just saw with the denim and the bumpers and the stitching and stuff? Do you do that all yourself, or do you have somebody that helps you put those together? Or?
No, I wish I had somebody that helped me put them together. Gosh, do you know anybody? No. No, and I mean, it's cool because I have had to learn all of these skills, but it's also quite time consuming because making the building is a ton of time. And then there's all of this like assembly that goes around it. No, I wish I had somebody to help me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of detail, and knowing how long, hand building in general takes, and the detail that's in your hand building, and then just to see your, like, all of the additional pieces that go into your displays, then how much time they must have taken. It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm amazing, psychotic, like one or the other. It's like, I'm not good at estimating how long things take because I'm convinced that if I could properly estimate it, I would never do it because I'd be like, that's crazy. But yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for the question. It's talking to a computer is hard because you can't vibe the room or anything. So
Right.
Yeah, I have a question also. There's like, it's just an observation, and maybe you could speak to it a little bit. There's like a telephone or power pole that and it seems to go outside of the piece to connect across. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the power lines, they show up in this piece too. The power lines keep popping up. I think things like the power grid, public transportation, but more like the sewers, these types of systems are amazing and beautiful, and we only notice them when they break down. And I think that is such an interesting idea, and the fact that like we can just flip a light on and light comes on. A lot of labor and work and planning went into that. So I always think about those representing these kind of invisible systems, and then also that we are all interconnected and reliant upon each other to like live in this society together.
So speaking of your lights, Russell is curious where you got your mini lights. So I don't know if that's an easy answer, if you can send it later.
Yeah, I mean, most of the lights are LEDs, and then further on, we're going to see some electroluminescent wire, and that is a much newer thing that I'm kind of messing with. And when we switch into my studio, I could pull some of that stuff out.
Yeah, he liked the ones like around your propane filling station.
I love the tiny lights. Yeah, those are just LEDs that are wired to battery packs. And you can get LEDs anywhere. You can get on Amazon. I think those I got from a model train website because they would wire up the LEDs and the resistor and the battery pack for you. It was meant for people that didn't know what they were doing. And I was just like, perfect, this is easy. You know, I can solder and do those things, but when you have this many moving parts, it's nice to be able to simplify it. But I can try to poke around and find where I got that from. That was a couple years ago. Now I'll just order the stuff off of like Amazon or some website and put it together. But you need a resistor, otherwise you'll blow up your LED. I've blown up a lot of LEDs. All right, any other questions? No. Yeah, but please throw them in. It really helps me not feel like I'm just shouting at my laptop. All right, so this show is titled Pat. This show was actually my thesis show. I went to grad school, San Jose State in San Jose, California. So this was my final show here. It's another triptych, so it's made up of like these 3 separate kind of sections, blocks, and they're all attached again by these power poles that I love and keep kind of popping up in my work. So these buildings are located in Edmonton, Alberta, my hometown, San Jose, California, where I was going to grad school, and the other one is in Kansas City, Missouri. Duh. So for this show, I source all of my images off of Google Maps. I've kind of moved away from that and I'm taking my own photos, but for a long time I was sourcing everything off Google Maps. So, you know, you can go on Google Maps, go in Street View, put your little blue person down and walk around. So I would go on Google Maps. I would know a neighborhood or a type of building that I wanted, and I would hop on Google Maps and I would plunk myself down digitally and I would walk around the neighborhood until I found a building that was kind of talking about what I wanted to talk about. And then one of my favorite things about Google Maps is your ability to go back and forth in time. Depending on where, you can go back like 8 or 9 years. So you can like go back and see the history of a building and see all the changes and what's happening. So you can even like pick a time period. Google Maps is just the coolest thing ever. I love it. So the tire shop I've been to, the corner store I've been to, the Kansas City brick building that we're going to talk about. I've never actually been there, but I went to NCCA in Kansas City and learned about Kansas City's history and decided that I wanted a warehouse, a brick warehouse. So I plopped myself down in a neighborhood that I'd driven through and seen was about right, and I found this building. Yeah, so then the pink building is, the show is called Pat. It's named after Pat, who owned the corner store that I grew up across the street from. So we're going to talk a bit about him. I've started doing a lot of writing with my work. My artist statements are usually like narratives. So I'm going to read you the narrative that I wrote about this show, starting now. And the slides are out of order. Whatever. So this is the Kansas City building. Yeah, I'm sorry, these are out of order. What a mess today is. All right. Talking a little bit about going back and forth in time. This tire shop was located right by the foundry of my grad school. And this isn't what it looked like when I was there. This is what it looked like 3 years previous. And when I was there, it was still like a tire shop, but it was very commercial, or you could tell it was like a newer kind of business. But when I went back in time and found this was clearly like a mom and pop small business. They had this really beautiful vintage sign. And I wanted to kind of talk about it being more of a small business. And I think, especially when you're talking about the Bay Area, rent is skyrocketing, tech is pushing people out. So kind of wondering what happened to this family business? Did they get pushed out by rent? Did they maybe just get old and retired? Not sure, but kind of wondering what happened to them.
Are your tires in that picture also ceramics, or are those a different material?
No, those are ceramics.
Wow.
I have so many tiny tires. And another piece, I use a lot of tiny tires. Those are all, they're just like toy trucks that I took the wheels off and made molds of. So I've got all different tire molds and all different sizes. So I just like slip cast a bunch of tires. I love tiny tires. Okay, so here's my Pat narrative. So this is the corner store I grew up across the street from. So I grinned eagerly as the heavy weight of change slid out of my small hand and onto his counter. Pat reached under his shop register, retrieving a calculator, just in time for my coins to quiet down their spinning staccato symphony. He quickly divided my allowance and couch findings into $1 piles, tapping into the calculator as he added the stacks and divided by 5 cents. He smiled as he turned the calculator face towards me. 78. Greedily, I took the small plastic bag from his hand and spun around to kneel on the floor and collect my treasures. 78 5-cent candies. 78 delicious sour soothers that were sure to ruin my dinner this night, as well as a few times a week, every week, from the time I was old enough to cross the street alone until I moved away from home. You guys don't have 5-cent candies in America, which makes me sound like I'm like 85 years old. But in Canada, most corner stores have 5-cent candies that you fill up in a bag. So I'm not 85, clearly. But Pat also, I think I had 13 cavities in high school, and this is like a direct reason why. So as the years passed and I went home to see my parents, I would often cross the road to visit Pat at the corner store for more of those candies. Pat was there every day, no questions asked, no holidays taken. I think that he had 2 kids, I think 2 sons. I don't even know his last name. The years wore on his face and on his store. The shelves became sparse and the interior dingy. But thinking back now, maybe it was always that way. The naivete of childhood often glosses over the reality. The store has changed now with the fresh coat of paint, new renters, and fancy yuppie bistro tables outside. My brother bought my parents' home, so he now lives across the street from Pat's old store. I called him to ask if he knows what happened to Pat, but he doesn't know either. So in grad school, I decided that I wanted to make this corner store, thinking about Pat, and I just like hopped on Google Maps, put in my address, spun around, and saw that it had changed, and instantly was like, whoa, what happened? He was there literally every day my entire childhood until I would when I was a baby to 18. So that was pretty shocking, and it's amazing because that's his red van that was always parked there, and that's him getting into his van on the Google Street View image, which also makes me think about, these ideas of space and history and all of these being forever frozen and captured in a digital sense. And then what does that mean when I then use that digital record to again make a 3D model of it? It gets a little wild in your brain. So you can see here, July 2014, July 5th, 2015. So just a year later, new owners, painted, new door, it's a whole new store. I make a lot of corner stores in my work, especially since moving to the States. So I think culturally corner stores are a bigger thing here, but people still will tell me about their corner stores. The story is about Pat, but it's also about, these universal ideas of these small businesses or the people that you kind of get to know casually in your everyday life. So moving on to another installation. This is one that I made. It's called Okay, Google, Take Me Home. This was installed at the Lawrence Art Center in Lawrence, Kansas. At that time, I had moved from California, where I was in grad school, to Montana to go to the Bray. So my phone just talked to me because what the show is about is well, that's weird, is moving a whole bunch and saying to my phone, okay, Google, take me home. And it the GPS popping up and it taking me home, and me being kind of pissed off because home is not Like home was what my phone labeled it, but it necessarily wasn't home. So it's kind of amazing that my phone just made a little entry into my talk there. So I just moved a whole bunch. I was really feeling untethered, and I was thinking a lot about what home is and how we make home within the walls of a structure. Is home people? Is home objects? Is home a cat? Like what makes home? So I'm going to read you another statement, the one that I made for this show. So to call someplace home is a complex decision, one that takes time. It's a relationship that can't be rushed. I've moved 3 times in the last 12 months, 4 times if you include only moving out of a house. A house I comfortably called home, a place I would settle down into, put down roots, grow old in. Okay, Google, take me home. I would say to my phone that I had tossed lazily, onto my empty car passenger seat. Okay, home, here we go, Google would reply in her confident robotic voice. And off I would go through the dark streets of a new town, on my way to home, past buildings that were alien to me, passing people that I had never met. So this is a part of that installation, 310 11th Street Northwest. This is a building from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And you can kind of start to see, have you guys noticed that the buildings look weird?
Yes, yeah, I
Thank
bet.
you.
Yeah.
Just talking into the void. So this one too, that's got a little LED light there. I really like the idea of kind of like leave the porch light on, that type of thing. So all of these buildings are made in 3-point perspective, in 2-point perspective, 3-dimensionally. So 2-point perspective is a technique that you use in drawing to make objects look 3-dimensional. And 2-point perspective, you will have the corner of a building will be running perpendicular, vertical, and then you'll have 2 vanishing points, and all of the lines will kind of retreat to those vanishing points. So when you draw it, it kind of gets like a triangular look. So I'm doing that, but I'm doing it 3-dimensionally in my studio using a lot of math and strings. So when you look at it at that kind of perfect point, it makes sense. But as you begin to move around it, it's a cheese wedge kind of look. So you can definitely see it on this piece where it's kind of like larger at one side and goes skinnier. So back on the road, now we're moving to Philadelphia. I was hired to be their artist in resident and adjunct assistant professor at Tyler School of Arts, part of Temple University. Hopped in the car, moved there. I think that Philadelphia is probably the most impactful city that I've lived in so far in regards to my own work. It was visually a really severe city. I found the garbage and the poverty to be overwhelming. It's a very segregated city, especially racially. A lot of history there, American history that I don't know and still trying to catch up on, and, we'll probably never know all of. I think the first 6 months I lived there, I hated it because, every day just driving, I lived in a bad neighborhood. It's not bad. It was just a poverty stricken neighborhood. But, every day on my drive to the studio, just seeing all this stuff was just incredibly saddening and hard to grapple with. Growing up in Canada, we don't really have bad neighborhoods per se. Like we just don't have that level of trash or poverty. It's just not there. That's something I always saw on TV, and I didn't think TV was real, but it's very real. So Philly was a hard city just to kind of see that level of pain. But after living there a bit, I really started to fall in love with the city. I really started to see it in the buildings, this like sense of pride, perseverance, history, craftsmanship. Now I love Philly so much and I wish I lived there again. and I would move back in a second if you let me. You know, looking up at these old row houses and seeing this like beautiful ornate molding, this beautiful brickwork, thinking about the labor and the effort and the thought that were put into making those buildings. And thinking about all of the like hope, you know, they made these small buildings based on this idea that like every worker deserved to have a home. You know, like the foundations of that city I really resonated with. So living in Philly led to me having a solo show at Greenwich House Pottery in New York City called Citywide. Most of this work I made while I was at ASU. I was at ASU for 1 year as Susan Biner's medical replacement. So I taught there for 1 year, and I also got a studio in Grant Street, which is the most beautiful studio I'll ever have. That building is stunning. So the show is called Citywide, like as a nod to it being buildings around the city, but also Citywide in Philly. You can walk into any bar and you order a Citywide and you get like a cheap gross beer and a cheap gross shot of whiskey, which I only did a couple times because it's gross. But I like that it's a large city that still has that kind of small town vibe and those kind of unspoken agreements. It's just, there's something casual about Philly that I really kind of resonated with.
I'm fascinated, Carly, by like even some of your display stands, because we've seen everything from pallets and cement bags to like your cart, and then that looks like an ironing board in the background. And is there like, how do those kind of, that idea come to you of what to actually, just even the stand itself, set it on?
Yeah, I think I don't have anything against pedestals, but I always think that that's such a missed opportunity to add kind of more content or more interest into a piece. So I've always been interested in making my own pedestals, and I'm always kind of like collecting different items that I think would work well. So yeah, that's a rusted out old laundry cart, ironing boards, like thinking about ideas of domesticity and labor and home and things that have a history kind of already built into them.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, the one on the back, which I got some pictures of coming up, is on like an old, probably not old, like a 90s laminate kitchen table that I think I saw in a ton of houses. So just kind of representing its heyday maybe with that stand. All right. So, I mean, I used to use all Google Map pictures, and I think a lot of that was about being a voyeur and feeling safe in these spaces. But now living in Philly, living in this neighborhood, driving down these streets, I just started to take my own pictures. I was there already anyways. I mean, I don't think I ever had the guts to stop. I would just drive by and like, so I think I have, my phone was just full of like creepy drive-by pictures. This one building just like captured my heart. It's a stunning building. Here, I got a couple more. Woo! Beautiful building. Layers of paint, you know, where there used to be doors boarded up. I think while I was living there, the sign on the front of the place changed 4 or 5 times. I ended up living in Philly for 2 years. Tyler asked me to stay a second year, which was awesome. So, you know, for 2 years, I got to just kind of see this place change, go through different ownership, hopped on Google Maps, got to see the history of it. Especially in Philly, in that neighborhood, it was what's known as a food desert. So there wasn't any grocery stores anywhere near. So a lot of people would, you know, get their food at the corner store. They were like social hangouts, just kind of hub of the community. And it's also just this like beautiful building with, I think it's called an Oriole window, is that rounded window. So this is an image that I got on Google Maps, and this was the time period that I ended up making it from. So Oxford Market was what it was called in 2007. Who knows what was there originally? Like, that's clearly a very old building. And I think that that's a Dominican Republic flag on the front there. So that building even talks about likely different kind of like generations and moves of immigrants coming to the neighborhood and how the demographics of the neighborhood changed, and you know, thinking about all of that as well. So by 2011, it had a new name. So I think this is right, 27 to 2011. So 4 years later. So now it's Popex, Mini Popex. I don't know what that even means, Mini Mart. But just to see all of it. And then I think when I left, it was this like hideous yellow and white thing that like a month after it went up, somebody took it and covered a bunch of it with tape. So the speed at which that thing is changing is quite impressive. And then here it is made out of clay. So you can kind of see that that's like cheese wedge thing is happening with the skewed perspective. And then these signs here are all, I cross stitched them myself. So they're all embroidered and then put on these like forms and put on the buildings. More of these power lines. Yeah, I mean, I think I might have to ask about the power lines. Here's a side view of it. So it's got an empty lot beside it. And here's a little van that we're about to talk about. And these are all sitting on top of quilts. As if I didn't do enough random skills, I decided I really wanted to get into quilting. I love the history of quilting, the idea of taking, you know, old clothes that have kind of completed that life and then having a new life as quilting. The history of quilting, women quilting, quilting bees, fascinating. So these are all sitting on top of quilts that I made. They're like my first quilts ever, so they're not, don't judge me on those quilts. So another thing that I kind of became obsessed about on this daily drive was this van that you can see in this lot here. And I took pictures of it, you know, daily, weekly for 2 years and saw its progression. So the van used to be sitting here in this empty lot. And then all of a sudden a fence went up around this lot. And then the van just somehow like got moved. And a foundation was poured and like a new building was going up. Van was like moved again. Side window got smashed out. I'm not sure how it's being moved because I don't think it runs.
Huh.
I don't have many more. I guess I didn't. I mean, the van picture is kind of like my cat picture. I'm like, how many pictures do people want to see of these things that I deeply love? But essentially that van got moved around that lot as this kind of like new structure went up within my neighborhood. Gentrification was quickly kind of like coming down the street at us quickly. So that lot went from like being full of tires and trash and this old abandoned van. And I have a special soft spot for a work van because that's not just somebody's car, that's their livelihood. And likely this was a stolen van that was dumped in that lot because of the amount of time it had been there. And then this like brand new building went up. It filled up with like what I think are frat boys, people that like, you know, maybe arguably that space in the neighborhood should not be used for that type of housing. But this van got moved around. And then eventually one day, I think a couple months before I left, I was driving down the street and the van was gone. And it was just this interesting, I don't know, it captured a lot of that neighborhood and what it was about. So I ended up making it. It's called Vanny. I love her. That's probably one of my favorite pieces. You can see there behind it, that tree is all made out of little glass seed beads. I always like mixing these kind of like high art materials with these kind of more crafty materials and kind of questioning what does and doesn't belong in the video, or sorry, in the gallery. This is the last of the buildings that were in my show in New York, 2046 West Diamond Street. I am a night owl, or I was, but now I'm having to be a bit of a grown-up and teach early classes. But I used to always come home from the studio really late at night, and China House, this corner store Chinese restaurant, would be closed during the day but open at night and had these amazing lights in the window. The community was all out there. There was always kind of stuff going on. And then again, I popped up on Google Maps and went back. This is from 2009. So at some point, you know, this building was built at a time when the economy was good, neighborhood was good. They could build this beautiful building with these gorgeous bay windows. And then at some point the neighborhood crashed and this building was like boarded up and like looking super rough. And then to know that later on it was kind of rejuvenated. It's interesting that these kind of like shells that humans kind of come in and out of them and change them. Also thinking about like the perseverance of this building and the labor that's embedded in it, the same labor that is embedded in a piece of cross stitch or embroidery is like embedded in a building. So here it is in the show, more power lines. And then I have a picture of it with the lights down low so you can see it. So there's little LED lights in all of the power poles. And then there's also electroluminescent wires, what's in the windows. And it's like little tiny rope light. So it's actually lit up and I have it so that it spins all the way around. Oh, and I lied. There's one more building that was in that show. So 2038 Clearfield Road was probably the building that up to my point in my career that I've struggled the most to make. There was another building in this neighborhood that I was on Google Maps trying to get to, and I typed in the address wrong and it dropped me at this house, and it just like really struck me.
Wow.
I think that at first, I mean, it's interesting because all these places I've lived and made work about, I've tried to be kind of this impartial observer and just kind of be like, this is what's going on. But I found myself not wanting to do this building because I thought it would look bad on Philly. And then I was like, oh no, I've like fallen in love with this city and I'm now like protective of it. So I really struggled with like, do I want to share this part of Philly or talk about it more? You know, but in the end, it was like, this is the truth. There's tons of this in Philly. I'd never seen a burnt out building until I moved to Philly, and they're just like everywhere. And maybe for Americans, that's normal, but in Canada, I'd never seen a burnt out building. I assume that we knock it down if it ever burnt. Although I think the burning happens usually after it's abandoned. And then also, this building, I don't do interiors of my building because I'm more interested in, it's almost like this magic space inside where all of those stories and narratives live. But to start to do the inside of the building was new for me. And so this is the first time that I did the inside of a building where it's kind of burnt out there on the right. And then where are we? Not actual time.
Hey, Carly, and I had the same question, but it was asked with the fact that you move around so much, where you must be getting quite the collection, one of pieces, but also do you keep your stands or how, like, where do you store all your stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I can show you that in my studio. I have a ton of crates. I don't usually keep the bases because that would just be a ton of work, or sorry, a ton of space. And then every time I move, it's mostly the moving space that I worry about. Like once I get to a place, you can usually find a place to put it. But I don't think, the one base that I have is I have the base for this building. It's a table that all kind of comes apart. And I think this is currently my favorite piece I have. So I wanted to still be able to like show it as it was. But I think all the other ones, their bases have met the dumpster. Yeah. Yeah, that's something, the longer that you're making work, the more you just kind of have to get used to a piece kind of meeting its end, I think. And that's a really difficult thing to kind of deal with, like letting go of a piece after. I usually cart a piece around for a couple years, show it a few times, and then eventually it'll just have to go. I don't know. I haven't done that yet with a big building. We'll see. All right, so I wish that I had written down the years on these pictures. That's a bit of a bummer. Oops. Well, I didn't write down the years, but they do go backwards. So, so you can kind of, again, on Google Maps, I was able to go back and watch this building kind of get rebuilt. You know, like here, I bet somebody still lives there. There's a car outside, you know? Okay, so this one on the left here was the first to go.
I think it says it down at the bottom. It says August 2014 on that one.
Oh, yes, it does. You're right.
Capture. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, so perfect. Okay, so 6 years ago. somebody's living in one of those houses. Also, I don't have a zoomed out version, but all around this is an empty field. And you can imagine that originally this whole area were row houses. So all of those other houses are long gone. And this is like this one little like three banger left kind of hanging on. 2014, so 2020. 2008. So 2008, two of those houses are still kind of working. The one on the left looks rough, but I love that you can even see that people were like still hanging out and still, you know, hanging out in the stoop, which is what I did a lot of in Philly. And I think that's as far back as I could go. So this is the piece that I ended up making about that. So I talked about it's on this kind of like 90s Formica table setup. On it quilted is a runner and 4 placemats. Kind of a closer view. The interior space is hard to take a picture of because it's all black, but it's got a whole interior room there that's all kind of burnt out with trusses. And then little bits of burnt wood on the ground. This one had a ton of tires because Philly, there's just tires everywhere. And I actually, it's in my studio, I stole, rescued an abandoned tire planter because people there make like planters and toys and stuff out of tires, which is like cool DIY that I just find fascinating. So I have a Philly tire planter that I hope to do something with one day. So here you can really see that skewed perspective. And the tires even get smaller as the perspective gets smaller towards the back. Just a little bit of ASU because I was there. These are the crates that I built, and I built these at Grant Street. Like over one day and night without sleeping because the freight company was coming in the morning. I ship my work freight. That's something we want to talk about. We totally can. So I built crates for all of my work and then palletized them. And then this guy came and picked them up and put them on a semi, and then they got shipped from Phoenix to New York. All right, now we're just gonna kind of, I thought you guys, I added these yesterday. I thought you guys, you know, you're a clay club. I thought you'd want to be like, how does she make these things? So a couple kind of behind the scenes. So they all start out as like very basic shapes, and then all of the detail gets added. So just kind of like 2 different versions of that. You can see that they're all, well, kind of, all of the pieces are built on a 10-degree wedge in my studio. There's like a little triangle I have to pop them up. Because often if you were to look at a building, you're smaller than it and you look up at it. So building it at that slight angle kind of adds that optical illusion. The little vanny getting made. Here's that guy on its side getting underglazed. I hope to talk a little bit about glazing today. What else do we have? I'm going to talk a little bit how I plan them all out. So a lot of math, a lot of measuring. I kept spilling water on this, so now I keep them in little plastic sheets. Mapping out, doing the math to map out all the different sides and all the different angles, because they're built at a 10-degree angle, and then there are like all these wedge shapes. So plotting all that out before I start. Here's that last one as I'm making it. I had a lot of fun making this one. I really enjoyed it. You can kind of see here on the left that wedge that everything's on. So that wedge is screwed to the table, and then a drywall board is screwed to that wedge, and the building is made on top of it. And they take anywhere from like 4 to like 6 months to make.
Is the drywall level?
No, well, the drywall is on that 10-degree angle.
It's on, oh, okay. It's slanted. Okay.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell.
Yeah, so once, you know, when I'm building a piece, everything's screwed to the table, nothing is moving. So you're kind of sunk in once you start. There should be a little video. Oh, video. I need to do more of these. Carving bits. And especially when you're doing something for that long, like you can see that everything's wrapped up in plastic except for that one little area that I'm working on. I often think about like when surgeons do surgeries and they cover up everything except for that little spot where they're like digging into somebody. And when you're working on something for this long, it's important that you're like, I'm constantly spraying it with water and not soaking it, but just misting it, and to the point where I don't even think about it. It's just a thing that happens. And when I am originally building these buildings, I'm also building them on plastic to make sure, because that drywall will suck that moisture out.
Did you ever think about using a damp box to keep your work in?
Yeah, and I mean, you need a pretty big damp box. The
Yeah.
thing is that it needs to be exactly where it is on that board, because I have 2 strings coming off of my back wall that are my 2 vanishing points. That's how
Oh,
I like mark all of my horizontals. So I can't like move it every night. I would lose all of that. So it has to like stay exactly where it is and be wrapped up there. But I use a damp box. I was going to tell you guys about a damp box, but you already got it. Yeah, damp boxes are amazing. I wish I had one big enough. Here's the bottom. It's a really ugly picture. But they don't have bottoms on them. They just have like a 2-inch kind of like border that goes on around them. When you're doing something that big with a flat bottom, you're just kind of asking yourself for cracks and lots of issues. Structurally, it's better to have that kind of 2-inch band. And then on the interior, they usually have all sorts of support walls to hold them up. You know, the walls are like a 1/4 inch thick and they're quite large pieces. So they need to be able to support themselves. Kind of before and after doing a black wash on a piece. Black washing is probably my favorite part. We're gonna do that a bit today.
That building is one of my favorite pieces I've seen on your site too. So I'm really glad that you didn't decide to not share that, you know, with. So I'm glad that you did decide to make it and share it with the world. And
Thank
it's a
you.
beautiful piece.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is still probably my favorite piece. It's the last like large piece I made before the pandemic. I haven't done anything large in about a year.
About what size would you say like a piece like that is?
I usually have a tiny tape measure. Probably like 2 feet wide. Around there, maybe 21 inches. It's like quite a large piece. Yeah, they're big boys. Trucks. I love to make trucks. I started out with this picture. This truck is called Big Berta, named after Alberta. This one's about 17 inches long. I made that little quilt to tarp its load with. I'd like to get back to that. I have an upcoming show in St. Louis, and I think I'm going to make a bunch of scrap trucks for it. A good photographer is worth their money in gold. He made this thing look like it looks like a Peterbilt advertisement. Yeah, I love it. Oh, little tiny mud flaps. Come on. This is my most recent work, you know, pandemic hitting, moving, you know, it was really dicey to get a visa and a job this summer. And I don't want to start a piece that's screwed to a table for 6 months and maybe we get shut down and that thing dries out. So didn't know what to make, thought about making really kind of aggressive political stuff. And then I just decided like, no, screw it. Like, let's laugh while we cry. So I made a series of dumpster fires and trash candles, and they're all candles. Inside of them, inside of the wax is buried 2020 trash. So it's hand sanitizers, toilet paper rolls, and all of the missing mail-in ballots are also in the dumpsters. So as you burn them, you can pull them out. It's soy wax, so you can just wash them all off when you're done.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And, you know, like the phone numbers usually have big dump in them or dump because Trump had a speech where he talked about the ballots and he was like, and then at 2 a.m. there was a dump. There was a big dump. And I was like, perfect. This is great food for my trash fire series. So just trying to kind of laugh through it. Yeah. All right. So thanks for listening. It's another truck that I made. So Instagram at Carly Slade, and that is my website. And I can take a couple questions and then we'll do a quick like 5-minute bathroom break and scene change. Sorry for all the technical issues there.
So when you're like working on your big projects for like the pieces that you do sell, are you like still at the same time kind of multitasking and making smaller pieces to sell, or once you start on a big project, is that where you just pretty much land? Because I also know you're instructing, and I assume at the same time you're building big pieces. So how do you manage your time?
I don't think I do manage my time poorly, constantly. Yeah, I meant to say that if you guys had any questions about selling, we could definitely talk about that. I think generally if I'm making a big piece, I'm making a big piece. If I'm making little pieces, I'm making little pieces. I think especially because the big pieces are screwed down to my table, it doesn't really allow me space to like work around it. The one thing that might change that is I have a ceramic jewelry company called Slade Goods that is sold mainly up in Canada. So that I'll kind of like put on hold and make a restock of that because that's quite small. But yeah, to do two things, I think I would get pretty frazzled and lost. Maybe one day when I have a huge studio, I can do that.
The vanishing point strings you said you have for your pieces that you work on, are they directly attached to the pieces you work on it? Or is there like a frame around it that the strings are attached to?
I only kind of caught like half of that, but I think the answer is that the strings are screwed into the wall at the level where the table hits the wall. So
And
that
then-
hole becomes a vanishing point.
And then how are they attached to the piece? Or is there a frame around the piece?
I hold them. I do some like crazy holding and then holding a ruler and then making a line. That I haven't figured out yet. But they're generally screwed to the wall and then I pull them and I hold it along that side and I'll mark all the things that I need to do as I kind of go down.
So it's temporary. It's just, I mean, they're
Yes.
permanently attached to the wall, but you temporarily hold them to get them the perspective lines that you need.
Correct.
Okay.
I wish there was a frame or something. I'm always trying to come up with some way to make the process easier, but I haven't figured it out yet.
It just seems like, that string is like kind of real approachable versus, something like lasers. So,
I was trying to come up with all these like smart ways of doing it. And then I was like, just make two physical strings. Like, we're all 3-dimensional people. That's like how our brains work. I was like, just use string. There you go. Like, perfect. Any other?
Yeah, it's been fascinating to hear about your 3D, 2D, because I don't hand build buildings like that. I make, dishes, so just to hear the complication and all the thought process of the math and stuff, that's like, holy cow, that's a whole new realm of ceramics and stuff that that's never even crossed my mind. So
yeah, I think there's also a lot of proportions and thought when it comes to making pottery. I could never make functional pot. I make a lot of like silly pottery, but I don't think I could ever make functional pottery because there's so much that goes into where everything's placed and the right weight. It's just a different kind of way of thinking. All right, in interest of time, let's everybody get yourself a tea or a bathroom break, and I'm gonna run my laptop over to my studio and set up there. So
perfect.
okay, I'm going to pause the recording. And so
could we do you're re-zooming?
yeah.
Okay, so if anybody has questions during this period, just like please throw it out there. I might forget that my document camera moves slower, so I'll try to move slowly with it. I wanted to start off by showing you guys some of those pieces in real life so you can get an idea of the size. So this is one of those dumpsters. This one I'm keeping for myself.
Wow.
I love it. It's got 22 karat white gold luster wheels. And then, I'm gonna go to this camera. Woo! It's waste mismanagement.
That's amazing.
Used to have been like, show us your moving parts. I'm no Andrew Clark, if you know who he is, who does like amazing moving parts. Like, this is just, you know, it's just got a hinge and it's just got a piece of wire through it. It's nothing fancy. And then inside, you can kind of see there's a couple little mail-in ballots poking out, a little thing of hand sanitizer. So this one's mine, keeping this one. These are some of the little bits that are in there. So quite small little guys. I love little things. Mail-in ballots. Woo! Geez.
Are those slip cast or something, or
No, these are all hand built.
hand built?
And I just made a whole bunch more of them. So I'll be glazing these today. Or sorry, underglazing them today. And then a couple other little things that I just kind of have kicking around the studio. I had this series, of food trucks that I made. So this is a Philly cheesesteak food truck. So it's called Stake Your Claim, and it's got little tiny steaks inside of it. It's a little tiny steak bun. I made a garden one. I've made a hot dog one. I made a whole bunch of different ones. I'd like to make a sushi one. So this little truck is slip cast, but it's made of like 5 different molds, and then each mold is multiple parts. So it comes out of a ton of different little molds. Like there's even a, it's too dark. There's even a little tiny steering wheel inside of it that you can't even see, that comes out of like a tiny 2-part mold. And then the last thing, this is, I made a ton of these during quarantine. So I made these porcelain USPS totes. So they're made out of translucent porcelain, so they show light. And then I made a bunch of little tiny mail packages, and these all come out of little molds. If you guys want, I can show you the molds. And then these labels, all the text on these things, I use a product called Easy Screen, EZ Screen. Yeah. And it's just, it's like super easy, and you just make these little tiny silk screens. And then I just use like dried out, like thicker underglaze, and just screen print through them. So these are like those are for the dumpsters. And then in here, what do we got here? Where's the cute one?
So you don't bother with a silk screen medium. You just make the underglaze thicker.
I just put this right on my wet clay, and I just squished some thicker underglaze through it.
Cool.
I know something.
Yeah, that's neat.
Sorry?
That's neat to see.
Yeah. Well, and it's like a super user-friendly, like crafty product. Like I think a lot of people use it to like screen print t-shirts or something, but it's just like super easy. It's flexible, so it can go on a round surface.
What's it called again?
Easy Screen, EZ Screen. EZ. It's a Z. Screen. There's your Canadian for the day. Okay, I think those are the things that I wanted to show you guys. Oh geez, 12:30. I was going to talk a bit about my process of scaling things. We only have half an hour left. I was also going to talk a bit about glazing. Would you guys rather, do you want to hear about planning? Would you rather jump to glazing? Do you want to hear about hand building? What do you want?
I kind of like the glazing bit, but that's just me.
Yeah, I'd vote for glazing as well, just because your stuff is so unique.
Maybe start there, and we'll see how much time we have left.
Yeah.
She's rolling away.
You can kind of see, not really. Well, these are a bunch of my glazes. So I mostly do underglaze. I don't do a ton of glaze. I also buy all my glazes and underglazes. You know, within ceramics, just people that like to make all their own stuff. I just like to buy it. I don't, you know, nothing needs to be food safe. It doesn't matter. So to me, that works fine. I use mainly Amico velvets, but I've got a whole bunch of different stuff. Speedball, I find, is making some nice stuff, and they're a lot cheaper, so I have those. Ooh. These are all of my underglazed test tiles. These are all my glazed test tiles. So I have them all unglazed and glazed. And then I'm sure most of you guys know, but you know, underglazes, you can mix them together to make colors. So I'll pull them out of there and get an idea of what I want. And these are all of my different glazes that I have. I mostly have a ton of gray because that comes up a lot in buildings and trucks. A thing that I learned at the Lawrence Art Center that I really like is mixing up your underglazes in like an ice cube tray. Underglazes can dry out and you can add more water and bring them back to life. So this way you're not kind of wasting material. And if I'm doing something like painting a dumpster and I want to just like put a little bit of dirt on it, you know, spray these up. I got a little bit of color, bang, good to go. Something that I started doing on these dumpsters that I like but don't like is Mike Sinelli. I don't think I've ever said his last name out loud. Really amazing work, kind of like, do you guys know Mike Sinelli's work? Not robot, but kind of like machinery, kind of. Look him up after we get off. Cinelli, something like that. Shows work at Companion Gallery a lot, but he has really amazing underglaze that he does. And he told me that he uses a lot of black iron oxide and red iron oxide, mixed 50-50 by volume with Frit 3124. So I mix those up and I love them when they are fired onto the pot, the sculpture. But what I have found is, because these are candles, I wanted them to have a gloss layer to seal them so they don't get like stained or dirty. And I found that underneath a clear glaze that both of these colors just went black. So that's a bit of a bummer, but I'll definitely be using these on my buildings when I don't put glaze on top. Something that I think a lot about when I'm putting underglaze and glaze on a piece is that I think the most successful pieces will have a combination of shiny and matte. If you're talking about sculpture, no matter what you're making, there's probably shiny and matte on it. I think a lot of people think that in order to finish a piece, they need to just like dump the whole thing in clear glaze. But it's just, it's like a little like, oh, it's a bit much when that happens. So the first step that I do, you know what's funny, is I cast some of my dumpster to show you guys unmolding it, and then I put a fan on it to make sure it'll be dry enough, and then it dried out, which is like the classic flip casting problem. But
Hey Carly, I'm sorry, while you get set up there, what's the Frit that you said you use?
3124.
3124, okay.
And that's just stolen directly from Mike. Thanks, Mike. This is the mold that the dumpster comes out of. It's a 5-part mold. It has a bottom and a top, which I've already taken off. But I always find that it's fun to watch stuff come out of molds. With these two, there's a lot of work that has to happen to them after they come out of the mold. I think a lot of times people think that it comes out of the mold and it should be done. But like my lids, my dried out lids, I have to go in and hand build and add a fat coil here so that there's enough of a space for me to put that hinge. I use standard clay 181 and I keep all my scraps when I'm hand building, and then I turn it into slip. And I find that it works really well as a slip. And that way I can like hand build and slip cast and put all of those components together without needing to worry about it.
Do you have to add anything else besides water to form the slip? Do you have?
To make it a slip, you need to add a deflocculant. So I use Darvan.
Darvan, okay.
I think it's like Darvan number 7.
Yeah.
It was around here. But I love, yeah, to be able to combine the two, I think is great. Like these trucks are slip cast as a very simple plain truck, and then I can like hand build all of these other elements on them. And you always want to use the same clay so you have the same shrinkage rate. So, dumpster, trash can. When I first make them,
Is that yellow dumpster, was that colored clay, or was that, that was slip cast and then,
Yeah. So when they're first slip cast, they look like this.
they're the white clay, okay.
And I often think that it's good for people to put some color on it before it's bisqued, because I think when a piece comes out of the bisque just blank, it can be kind of alarming and daunting, because you're like, what am I going to do with this whole surface? But for me, because I have all these little tiny details, chances are if I were to underglaze them wet, I would fill in all of those details. So I just bisque it as it is. It comes out. And then the first firing that I do, I just think of it as like the color blocking firing, where I'm just like, okay, I want this to be yellow. I'm gonna want these wheels to be gray. Just paint it in those base colors. And then I set fire it. So if you're paying for your firings, the way that I work is probably not that great. You know, each of my pieces gets fired 5-6 times. You know, I biscuit, I color block it. I'm probably going to do 2 coats or 2 firings worth of like adding different colors, a glaze firing, and then I'm also going to do a luster firing for the wheels. So, you know, but when you want like this kind of depth of color, like you need to kind of build it up in layers, just the same way that like, you know, in the real world it's built up like grime. So this is just water, red iron oxide, 3124. Mixed up in here. I find these really settle. You just gotta mix them up really good. And then I think that for this round of dumpsters, I'm actually going to switch to like a rust colored underglaze and a black underglaze, because like I said, I find after the clear, it all just kind of reads as black, which is a bummer. All right, let's do this. It looks like there's like a gun pointed at me sometimes. Yeah.
I did notice the sniper laser a couple of times, yeah.
Show where the points are on the document camera. So, yeah, it's definitely settled, just kind of getting it off the bottom. On all of my pieces, yeah. I always make sure to have kind of lines dividing where all the different surfaces are coming together, which I usually just do with my Dolan knife. That way I'm kind of like making a seam where my color can sink into, especially like when I do a black wash. You can kind of see on this guy how there's like a black line around here. That's because I've carved in that little line and then plan to have it as a spot where the underglaze will last. So when I'm kind of texturing something, you know, especially something like this, it's a combination of just kind of like using water to help it move. Especially something like if we're thinking about rust, and rust is kind of carried by water. Let me switch a bit over to the red here. The other thing that I'll do sometimes, sponge is in the bottom of the bowl. I do a lot of kind of like adding stuff and then wiping it off. That kind of helps give it texture. Using gravity to kind of pull it down, move it around. I put those little guys. There they are. I've got these guys, which I kind of love and hate, but they've got a really great little tip on them. So these are a lot of what I use to make all of the like little bits of graffiti I used with those.
And is that, what's that say? Mako's designer liner? Is that what that says?
Liner. Yeah, I mean, I think you can just buy these tips and put them on any old
Oh,
bottle.
okay.
But I did find that these actually worked quite well. I've got a black one, or sorry, a white one and a green one. And I think I used them on all of these. I was doing some splatter action too. Yeah, that's some good rust. But I think like this is really just about kind of like building up that base layer. And thinking about, you know, if you guys weren't on my laptop, I would have up a bunch of different pictures of rust and dumpsters that I've taken and collected. So I would be looking at those and referencing those as I work. And then I can show you guys. Doing a black wash. I black wash all of my pieces, like without question. That's usually, I'll usually do a couple layers of underglaze, probably 1 or 2 layers of underglaze, kind of building up that surface. And then I'll set fire it. I'll fire it in the kiln, 06. And then I'll bring it out, and probably the last phase will be, just gonna add a smear of paint here. And then the last firing, I'll black wash the whole thing. And I can do that a little bit. I'll do it on the back here. So I black wash in like an expensive way. I think that other people do this in a more economic way, but I just use Amico's Velvet Black, water it down, paint it on there. So I'll just pour a little bit my ice cube tray, so that way I'm not wasting it. I'm currently very into, Mako made these soft fan brushes, Mako number 4. These are currently my like go-to for putting on large areas of color. I find that they move the material really well. I think a lot of potters are very into like your kind of Chinese ink brushes, which I think is good for carrying glaze and moving it around in kind of this even layer. But I personally have never found really any use for them in like underglazes and sculptures. So, I mean, I'm up for debate, but that's how I feel. So black wash, water it down. Probably even be a bit more watered down. We're just gonna paint it on. And this is like the scary part because you're like, uh-oh. I hope it looks good. One of the reasons that I switched to using lots of underglaze and set firing and this kind of method is that you don't have to make all of your decisions at once, and there's time to fix a problem if it comes up. Like if I fire this and hate the whole thing, I mean, I could probably paint it yellow again and try again. Probably take a couple coats. But you know, when you have one shot to glaze something and that's it, you know, whew, that stresses me. This way you can kind of like, you can add a little bit of it, add this color, add that color. You can kind of like ease your way towards it. But when I've done residencies where I have to pay for each one of my firings, I'm like, ooh, that hurt. So the trick to black wash is to make sure that it dries completely, because if you do it before it dries completely, it'll come back off. So we're gonna leave that to dry fully. Are there any questions as I'm putzing away?
When you get started, like at this phase.
You make just one.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Love it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, will you please make one Oscar the Grouch?
it occurred to me that I was making trash cans, and then I have a cat named Oscar, and if I had the technology skills, I would like make Oscar coming out of a trash can. But I can't sculpt animals, so I'll need somebody digitally to do that for me.
And so you need somebody to collaborate.
Digital, oh my god, that would make me so happy.
And is this like the multiple firing method that you're talking about and gradually building up on your colors? Is that also how you do your big sculptures too?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of showed that in the slideshow. I need to get better at taking in progress pictures. But like when I first get it out of the bisque, you know, if the building is say yellow, I'll just paint the whole building yellow and put it back in the kiln and then take it out. Usually something like bricks. Bricks are really good with sponges. So I'll take like, you know, often just like the top of a container I have, and on there, I'll put a couple different colors of browns and reds that I would see in a brick, and then I take a sponge and sponge it on there. Fire that, bring it back out. Do a black wash, but whatever color the grout is between the bricks. Sponge that all off so it just stays in the low places, fire it, bring it back out.
So do you sometimes end up doing multiple black washes then? Or usually just?
No, usually that's a one-shot thing, because the one thing that you need to remember about black washing is that it will cover up and dirty your whole piece. Like you can't just decide to black wash a little area because it's going to forever stain it.
And do you do that toward the end of decorating or in the middle or?
So this guy right here today, after we're done, I'm going to take it and the 12 others that I have, and I'll do all of the rusting on them, tag them up a little bit, and then I also need to paint this white sign onto them.
Okay.
Fire it, and my next firing, I'll paint the whole thing in black underglaze, sponge it off, and then fire it, and then the next one will probably be a clear glaze. And you could clear glaze it before the black underglaze is set. I just don't, just in case it somehow moves. So this isn't totally dry, but we can see a little bit of what would happen. And when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're going against your groove. If I were to sponge with this divot, it'll pull all of that underglaze right out. And depending on how much you kind of leave on versus how much you take off, you can really kind of determine your grunge level, I guess. Now make sure that you're rinsing off your sponge fairly regularly and not too wet of a sponge because it'll go all around. But you can see all these lines that I've made, it's all kind of sunken into those, and that really helps age it and make it look like it kind of lived on a street somewhere. My wheels, I made sure they have they've got like a little bolt in them. They've also got lines where the tire is inside of the wheel. The black will really kind of, you can see it popping those details there.
And are your wheels also mold made and then you attach them separately, or are they part of that 5-part mold you?
Oh. So those come out of this little 3-part mold.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty ridiculous. And I'm like, I never have enough wheels. I should have made 2 wheel molds.
Hey, Carly, I have a question for you.
What you got?
Let's say, this is a hypothetical. If you could model your work in a 3D modeling program, and let's say the technology got a little better and can print a little more accurately in fireable ceramic material, and it doesn't have the lenticular quality. I mean, where do you draw the line with the technology that you use in your process? Do you still want your hands on it, or would you say, hey, I can make 5 buildings in 6 months instead of 1 building now, or I could explore more ideas. I mean, I'm just curious about, because that's coming.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard because I think a lot of my process being so time intensive is kind of like reflecting on the time and labor that went into me making the places that I'm making. And like, if I took that out, I don't know, what does that mean? I also think that I like doing clay because you have to do it by hand. It involves craftsmanship. It involves labor. I think
Right.
I'm interested in it when the technology breaks down. I'm interested in like the scaffolding, like those types of things, like the fault of it, I find more interesting than maybe it working. But then I think like these trash cans are made in a mold, which is much faster than me making them, hand building each one. So is that in a way, I mean, that's kind of a method of
Right. I know, and that's the kind of I battle with those same things when I think about that. Like, well, you could also say, well, you're using a pottery wheel, that, or electricity, or all of those things. And I think, but again, I'm with you. There's something, when you lose the tactile aspect of that, I think that is such a, I don't know. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, and there's also a lot of labor and time that goes into like building those things on a computer. Like there still is craftsmanship, but it's different. So yeah, it's like I could argue kind of like both sides of it.
Right, sure. Well, and there's things like when I started working with 3D modeling programs, because of the way that it works, I just think about the crazy perspective that you use, and then the computer, that tool can sometimes even push another even form of perspective that is almost hard to get without using that tool, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Or it may expand an idea in a way that you might not have seen before. I don't know.
Well, and like the perspective thing that I do, which I consider like cowboy math, like it's strings and some basic geometry. I'm sure that if I learned a CAD program, I could do it so much more efficiently on a computer and get all the dimensions. I don't know. And do I just not do that because that's a big hurdle to climb, or do I not do that because it's important that I do the math myself? Like, at what point do you kind of lose that handmade? Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing within ceramics right now, an interesting thing to think about. If I had access to a 3D
Yeah,
printer.
Yeah. I think after you stay after it long enough, though, ultimately you find what you keep doing, what makes you happy the most. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like if I were to sit at a computer and print out my buildings, I think I would quickly stop doing it because that's like not what I enjoy doing.
Sure. But it does, I mean, it does get excited. I mean, yeah, again, back to like, wow, I could make more work, or I can, anyway. Sorry to interrupt. I was just thinking about how to apply certain processes that I use, and what how you would incorporate that if you were doing it or using it.
See, I would be down to like 3D print, like the power lines that I do. Like I slip cast those because I need a lot and it's faster. So I would be down for, I've thought about before 3D printing parts of my installations. And in that case, I like that they have those lines, whatever they're called.
If there's others,
I would think too.
Go ahead.
Thanks. I would think also, using your dumpster for an example, how much your mold costs to make that dumpster versus how much 3D printer costs for having someone 3D print for you. and doesn't really save any time.
But I guess like if I was good at 3D printing, like I'm good at mold making, maybe it would save time, or maybe be the same time. Is it just skill sets and, you know, having those tools and technology at your fingertips?
Yeah.
Melissa, what do you keep trying to say?
No, I was just going to ask, and I'm glad somebody spoke up. If there were others that had thoughts on 3D printing or the graphic design. One of the Arizona Clay members, who I'm hoping to have present more in person later in the year, is this David Anderson, and he makes these spheres. And so a lot of his, he puts a lot of like drawings and CAD models and stuff when he's, you know, planning out his spheres, and he has a bricklaying background, a construction background, so he's put a lot of that skill set into his planning for his spheres. So it's interesting you're talking about this, and I wish he was on the call, because I'd be interested to hear his perspective on this question.
Yeah, totally. Well, now that I'm coming to all of your talks, we can ask him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think a lot of my work is just time and layering and adding kind of more and more. Like with detail, it's just like the patience to add more and more. You know, like if we're looking at this little truck, painted all the base layers, you can see there's a black wash because the texture is kind of popping out. There we go. And then I've done clear glaze on some parts of it. Clear glaze up here, underglaze here, some more glaze. There's definitely, like I was talking about, like the shiny and the matte, I think really makes a successful sculpture. That's an appropriate amount of messy on that side.
Yeah.
A lot of this too, like the nice thing about underglaze, if, you know, I'm like, oh, that red's a bit too much, I can just add water and go back in and move that around. There's a lot of kind of ability to move, and also water can carry it and make these like really beautiful pools that I really enjoy. And like this black wash, I did this typically before I would do it within my steps, but that's fine. You know, I'm going to carry on and I'll do the rust all the way around and I'll fire it. And then I'll take it out of the kiln, and then I'll black wash the whole thing again, wipe it off, set fire it, bring it out, glaze it, set fire it. So it really kind of opens up a lot of potential for kind of like layering it, changing your mind, trying different things.
You were going to talk about sales and your jewelry company and all. We have a couple minutes. I don't know if there's time, but.
Yeah, what do you want to know? Let's see.
So are you selling through galleries or through your website or Instagram sales?
Let's see, I just have a couple of these. These are some, these are cats. I sell a lot of cat earrings. Oh man, I made cat earrings before I had a cat though. You know, my Slade goods, I definitely look at as a business separate from my studio practice. And I think that's kind of important because Slade goods is a money-making venture. So it doesn't necessarily have my style in it. So Slade goods is sold 90%, I would say, through like little boutiques and clothing stores. Like it is that type of market. They are carried at the Archie Bray and the Clay Studio here in America, but that's just because I happen to be at those places. I ended up partnering with my best friend from high school, and she is a fantastic salesman, super charming, lovely. She goes into these stores, sells it. She does all of the accounting and all of that. She manages the store. So I just make the product and ship it down to her. With my own work, you know, like the dumpsters, I don't often sell my work. It's kind of new that I'm doing these like small runs of pieces. Typically it was just the big buildings, and those, I don't want to, those are all, oh, you can see them. I'm sorry, it's such a mess. But those crates, this whole thing is full of crates, and that's where all those big buildings are. But when it comes to my dumpsters and the USPS totes, those I sold them strictly through Instagram. So I have a WordPress website, and I am a big WordPress fan. I think WordPress is the best place to build a website. And with a WordPress website comes a shopping page. So I just like will hype up on my Instagram for a week or so before that I'm gonna have a shop update. And then I'll just put all my stuff on my WordPress shopping page and I'll sell it through there. And then the biggest, most best piece of advice, Kate Schroeder is out of Kansas City. She makes the cups with like little tiny pots and scenes around them. But she told me about a website called Pirate Ship. And it's just like a gift from the shipping gods.
Yeah, I use that. It's discounted USPS shipping.
And you just print it off, tape it on the box. You go to the post office, walk past the line, just put your stuff on the desk and walk away. Yeah, slightly discounted. It keeps all of your tracking in one spot. Whenever I can, I'm like telling everybody about pirateship.com. It's the best thing ever. Are there any other questions about selling?
Well, so is it on your WordPress site then that we can find your dumpsters, your dumpster fires?
Yeah. Yeah, carlyslade.com. I mean, the dumpsters are sold out and the pre-order sold out. All the dumpsters I just made are for pre-order. But I did make an extra couple, and I hope to put, oh gosh, watch your sleeves. Oh man, watch me cry on this artist presentation. I hope to put another couple up on my website in the next few weeks. You know, like we were talking about earlier, school starts next week. So, you know, unfortunately, when you're a teacher, everything kind of comes to a halt. But I hope to have some dumpsters up for that. I'm working on a series of new pieces for Companion Gallery's call. It's called Last Call is their show. It's all liquor stuff. Brian will probably enter. I actually won it a couple of years ago. And I like to tell people that I'm an award-winning potter, even though they were barely functional. But I've been working on, where is this big baby? Here it is. This is a mold of a bunch of those USPS totes stacked up. And my plan the whole time has been for all the packages to like be like a little pile, like a handle. Like a handle of packages on a cup that is a stacked tote. And then I want to make like the mailboxes with the big necks on them so you can put stuff in from your car. I want to make one of those that's like a decanter that you pour into the leaves. It's going to get weird. I hope it works. I haven't told anybody except for all of you. And I have to make it work.
That's cool. Yeah, keep us updated on that, Carly, as it starts to come together for sure. So we are at noon, and I don't want to rush you necessarily. I just had a question about what. So you're starting school next week. So what do you teach your students? Like, are you teaching them these techniques? Do you teach them mold making? Is it a little bit of both? Or what's the focus in your classroom then?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the semester. This semester I'm teaching 2 beginning classes and a sculpture class, which I'm super stoked about. So primarily like a lot of like hand building techniques, a lot of slab building techniques. That's kind of where my main love would be in like large scale slab building. This would be similar, you know, talking about underglazes and building up surfaces. This is for sure one of the like lessons that I have with them. I have taught mold making before, just not this semester. Yeah, this is pretty much similar. I think the difference would be that I would be giving you a prompt and you would be coming up with something inside of that. I've taught sculpture classes before, which are probably like wood shop kind of sculpture classes are probably one of my favorite classes to teach. Grad seminars, hand building, wheel throwing just a little bit because I secretly.
Nice. Do we have do we have any other questions? Anything you want to ask Carly, to a technique that you saw maybe on a building or something? We are at time. But while we have everybody here, does anybody have anything else you want to have Carly talk a little bit about before we part our ways?
Sure.
Let me throw it in and then you can go. The one thing that I was going to talk about with my hand building was going to be texture. And I think the texture is what makes a lot of my buildings work. And this is just a little container I have of all different types of textures and little bits you can push in to make like a little doorknob, a little detail, a little outlet, something like that. Somewhere around here, I have my collection of rocks. Rocks are the best way to get like brick textures. I always push texture with my students. It's an amazing thing that clay can do, that it can take those textures. I think that adds such a great base. So sorry, I cut somebody off.
Yeah, no, that was great. Yeah, Jeannie.
Yeah, I was just curious. I'm always curious to find out what you do for cracking and repairing.
Oh yeah, I have a whole
Great.
bin. Yeah, my undergrad was very like anti-fixing work, anti-glue. They were very kind of pottery focused. And then I went to my grad school and everybody was gluing together everything. And I was just like the happiest I've ever been. You know, like a smaller crack, drywall putty is what I use a lot of. So the same stuff that you would fill, you know, like the spackle that's like pink and then turns white. I'll use a lot of that if I'm going to paint over it. If I'm going to try to fix it in clay, I use something called crack pot. Let me spin away. Oh. This is my bin of glue. Because I mean, if you're not eating drinking with it, I don't see any problem with a nice glue line.
Thanks for asking that question, Jeannie. That's a good.
Yeah, that's a great
You're
question.
welcome.
I can't find. I took everything off my table and put it on a cart, and now I can't find it. So this is an example of the drywall putty I would use. I'm sure you guys, you know, you take a nail out, you fix it. Sandable, paintable, I think that's great. If I'm trying to fix something still in clay, Mr. Mark's crack pot, you get it at the ceramic shop in Philly, they mail it. One thing I'll say is that as soon as you kind of open it up, it starts to dry out really fast, which is a bummer. So I have like a couple of them on hand. A friend of mine, Rachel Storino, is actually the one who invented this product. So I'm constantly peeved that she doesn't get a cut of the profits, because it's amazing stuff. It's like, I think it's like soft brick and something else all kind of crushed up and put together. So it fills a crack really well. You can glaze over top of it. Amazing. I can't find the big version of this, but my favorite glue in the whole world is called Maxi Cure. This one is by Bob Smith Industries. The glue Maxi Cure is sold by a lot of model makers under different names. So it might be like Joe Bob's store. So don't worry about Bob Smith. It needs to be Maxi Cure, and it's a cyanocryolate glue. This is the thick one. I usually just use the purple one, which is like the medium thickness. This stuff will glue anything to anything. It'll glue all of your fingers together. It's super toxic and it makes your eyes burn, but it's good stuff. And then it also has, this stuff is Instaset. My chair just dropped. So if you're ever trying to like glue a whole bunch of stuff up high and you're trying to hold it together, You just spray this stuff on it and it cures instantly. Amazing. But very bad for you. But most good things are. I think that's kind of, oh yeah, here it is. It's all Insta-cure. Amazing stuff. Definitely not food safe though if you're thinking about doing that.
Esper sculpture.
Oh no.
There was a question I missed, Carly. Just when you're doing your step firing, what was the cone you said you fired to during your step firings?
Set firings 06.
06, okay.
Sometimes 04, like you're just kind of like, you're just needing to set that underglaze in place so that you can go over top of it and not move it. Lately, I've been doing 06 because I think that our little kilns here at school are over firing it a bit. And I just haven't taken the time to fire a cone in there and figure it out. I've just dropped down because I was noticing on my first round of dumpsters that my velvets were starting to like vitrify a bit and I wasn't able to keep adding. One thing that I should have said is that my clay is cone 6 to 10 clay, and I generally biscuit to cone 1 and then I just set fire repeatedly. So I want a clay that is still super porous so it can handle me repeatedly adding more underglaze to it. If I were to use a low fire clay, it would vitrify and I wouldn't be able to kind of pack all of these colors onto it. If that makes sense.
That does, that's great to know.
It's an important one. Although lately, you know, I've been messing around.
Hey, can I ask one more question?
Hold on though. But lately I've been trying to figure out if bisking to cone 1 is really making it much stronger than if I were to just bis to 04. And I've bised some tiles and broken them and they feel like they break the same. I don't know. But again, I'm also not making dishes. So nobody should be like dropping a sculpture. If they're going to drop it, it's game over. So mess around. But sorry, Brian, what you got?
Now he's mad.
When you deflocculate your standard clay and you said with your scrap, are you doing that by weight? Do you dry it out completely and then weigh it and then mix it? Or are you just kind of like eyeballing this?
Yeah, I really struggled with that last year because I was teaching slip casting and I was like, okay, I should learn all of the numbers and do things properly. But I just don't. I dry it out, bone dry, add water, leave it overnight, come back the next day, mix it, and then just add Darvan until I think it looks good. You know, and I bought, wherever it is, the glass tube that you put in to measure the specific gravity.
Right.
I've just found that that doesn't work for me. I just do it by eye.
Because yeah. I've been wanting to deflocculate B mix but honestly, the casting slip that I use, you know, they always say don't mix stuff together, and I've actually gotten away with it pretty, or my shrinkage between the two different clays are close enough that I've been mixing my casting slip and Laguna B mix, and I've had no issues with it. I think I do a pretty good job of where the connections are though, as far as like really like slipping and scoring and mixing those, but like I've had nothing crack off and I've done all kinds of attachments.
What kind of casting slip?
I don't know I don't know even who makes it. It's like they've got a low fire and a high fire white, and I think it's I just get it at the clay supplier, but I don't think Laguna makes a B mix casting slip. So what I'm getting at is I would prefer to have my own clay body as a casting slip, exactly like you're doing. So I was seeing how you get a little more information, but I'm certainly willing to throw some in there. I think I can figure it out that way too. Trial and error.
Like my understanding is that not all clays make good casting slips. So it's possible that B-Mix just sucks as a casting slip. Like, I don't know why it wouldn't be widely sold already, because it's a good clay. So that kind of
Yeah.
makes